Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. I'm the GM Philosopher, and today we are talking about 20 different dungeon ideas.
Pathways lie in this game. Your world is wide. Heroes rise.
So let's talk about dungeon number 1, the classic Monster Lair. This is pretty simple. It's a lair where a monster lives. This could be something the monster built itself. It could be something that was repurposed by the monster. But at the end of the day, what defines this dungeon is the fact that there is a monster or monsters living there, and they have their loot or their treasure there. And you, as the adventurers, will use the GM running the game for adventurers. You want to have your adventurers go into the dungeon, root out or battle or sneak around the monster, retrieve loot, and this is the purpose of the dungeon. I love classic monster lairs because they are really the most classic type of D&D dungeon. There's a monster in there, you want to get the good stuff, and then get out without perishing. This is kind of the goal. Dungeon number 2 is the Ancient Ruin. This is exactly what it sounds like. Ancient ruins, they may be underground, they may be above ground. Dungeon sort of makes it sound like the ruins are underground. And so if I were going to run an Ancient Ruins dungeon, that's probably the direction I would go. An underground ruin. And it is exactly like it sounds like. The players are exploring an ancient ruin. I think that one of the best things about this type of dungeon is the fact that there's a lot of exploration and discovery that can happen. It could be tied to an ancient civilization. There could be old artifacts here. There could even be undead from the previous civilization. And there's also the question of how this became a ruin. Did it get covered up by a volcano, something like that? There's a lot of story that can be put in here. And a lot of times it's really just about the exploration and discovery with these types of dungeons, but great dungeon to run for your group. Now let's talk about dungeon type number 3, the Cursed Tomb. By the way, do you struggle to come up with plot arcs on the fly? If so, I have the perfect tool for you. It is called my Ultimate Plot Randomizer. It is a free ebook. When you join my email list, you can download this for free. You'll get the link in your first email. It contains 4 D100 tables that will let you roll random plot arcs whenever you need them. Roll the hook, the conflict, and the conclusion, and even add wild and wacky stuff all right there. Download this, print it out, add it to your tool collection, and you will never go without another plot arc again. I give this away for free to help you create awesome plot arcs just like I do. I use this in almost every single session, and you are not going to want to miss out on this, so make sure you grab this. All right. Now, we all know that tombs can make fantastic dungeons, and they can get very big and elaborate. You just look at like the pyramids of Egypt as an example. These are basically historic locations with very complicated and complex tunnel systems connected to like sarcophagus rooms, tombs, crypts, etc. Now, here's the thing about running a cursed tomb dungeon is that you have the whole tomb undead type thing to go along with this. So maybe there was a king, a great wizard, maybe there was a minor deity, maybe a great monster that was revered by the people. Maybe it was buried here along with its treasure. However, it is cursed, and if people enter the tomb, they will threaten to awaken the defenses and possibly even the buried thing, monster, person, king, wizard, etc. themselves, making for a fantastic and chilling, kind of creepy thriller like dungeon crawl. Now, let's talk about dungeon type number 4, the wizard tower and or laboratory. Okay, wizards are known for building towers. This is probably because they like to see around and they like to have access to the local area. It's good for a wizard to know when enemies are coming, and a quick survey of the local area a few times a day lets them know when danger may be near. This also unwittingly makes wizard towers relatively easy to spot if they are not obscured by magical means. However, they are often connected to underground labyrinths, aka the laboratory. This is a type of dungeon that I really enjoy because I love the idea of like powerful wizards doing just wild things. Like, what happens when you take a very powerful wizard, you give them the means to create an underground laboratory, aka dungeon, and then you just let them do whatever kind of wild research their brains and hearts can conceive of. You get some wild stuff, some super wild stuff. And so that's exactly what this type of dungeon can give you as a GM. Give your players an opportunity to delve into a dungeon where there is literally wild wizard stuff going on. And the fact that it's a dungeon would lend itself to the idea that maybe it's an old dungeon. So maybe the wizard at one time was doing experiments here, but now they are no more. What is left in the dungeon? Well, the remnants of dangerous magical experiments, perhaps magical machinery, perhaps things the wizard created that are dangerous, all kinds of stuff, plus the wizard's treasure hoard. So this is an awesome type of dungeon for all kinds of reasons. Dungeon option number 5 is the underground city. Now, underground cities are exactly what they sound like. Cities located underground. I like to think about this type of dungeon in reference to an old or abandoned or left behind underground city, because when you use the word dungeon, I just associate that with like an underground city that is no longer populated in like a modern day sense. So, for example, I would call an underground city an underground city unless it was an abandoned and falling apart underground city, in which case it would become an underground city dungeon. But there are a lot of reasons to run this type of dungeon in your games. Players may need to go here to find clues. Perhaps there was at one point a civilization here that had special technology. Maybe the players need this technology. Maybe the players realize that the bad guys they're fighting have a hideout in this underground city. And this is different than just a ruin. An underground ruin is like a very specific type of structure, but an underground city is large. And that's another thing that makes this type of dungeon really interesting, is that you can map out a whole underground city. It might be days that are required for the party to actually sweep this, to explore it, and to find what they're looking for, if it's even there. Plus, who knows, all manner of different types of creatures may be living here. There might be like different factions even down here. So just because the city at one time was populated in a modern sense, but then that population either vanished or they died out or they fled. Now who's living here? Maybe there's a rat colony of giant rats, and then there's goblins over in the east, and then maybe you have evil wizard has made their lair in one corner and everyone stays away from them. Maybe you have undead roaming the thing. Maybe it was overrun by zombies, and so they sunk it with explosives, and the zombies are now contained in it, but danger, they could be let out. So there's all kinds of opportunities for adventure with this one. Hey, real quick, are you tired of rolling the same old dungeon loot using these same old methods time after time, game after game? Well, I have a solution for you. This is how I roll all of my dungeon loot now. It's a book I created called the Ultimate Dungeon Loot Randomizer. This book contains 10 massive D100 tables full of awesome dungeon loot. Roll on a table for mundane items, slightly magical dungeon items, mundane weapons and armor, magical weapons and armor, individual pieces of treasure, magic scrolls, potions and elixirs, cursed items, forgotten wonders and otherworldly relics, and even full chests of treasure and loot. This book is now available on my Blurb bookstore in 3 different versions. There's a hardcover option, a softcover option that's more affordable, and a super affordable digital ebook option. It's even system agnostic, meaning you can use it with any fantasy TTRPG system, and you can just adapt it to the rule set you're using. Link is in the description. Don't miss out. Grab it today. And that leads us to dungeon type number 6, which is natural cave systems. Now, not all dungeons are created by creatures, by sentient beings. Some of them are natural formations. And when you go into a cave, there could be a lot of different reasons for why your players are going into a cave, but a cave can be a dungeon. And one of the things about caves is that they can often go in 2 different directions. Sometimes caves are occupied by creatures, monsters, animals, and these can be very dangerous, but they can also have things in there that are valuable. For example, maybe they hunt and kill prey. They drag their prey to the cave, they eat them, but they do not eat the valuables, so there are piles of loot sitting around. Or maybe this is a situation where like a dragon has made residence in a cave, and so there could be dragon eggs, players going in there to retrieve dragon eggs. But natural cave systems can also be used by other creatures wanting to have a hideout or a base. There could be a goblin raiding party making their home here. A necromancer might be making their lair here. You could have a group of trolls who have decided to build home here, and they're collecting trinkets from the poor humans, dwarves, and halflings they've been smashing up and putting in their soup. There could be a lot of applications for where a natural cave system makes an awesome dungeon. And one of the cool things about natural cave systems is that they often have a very non-typical flow to them. So you might have like underwater outlets. You might have little bitty nooks and crannies where a small person could sneak through, but the larger ones couldn't. There could be hiding spots in caves that larger creatures can't find, but smaller creatures could find. And these types of things are now often built into man-made structures. And so that makes natural cave systems pretty cool for that reason. Another thing about natural cave systems is kind of fun and kind of dangerous is that they can flood. And this is not all that uncommon in some caves. And so you have a situation where if there's like a heavy rainfall outside, you have to be really careful. Cave may flood. And this might also determine what types of creatures make their homes here. If a cave is always flooding when it rains, then it's possible that the goblins can't make this work as a hideout. So it might be some kind of amphibious or water type creature who makes their home in this cave because they wouldn't care about that. And that's going to lead us to our dungeon type number 7, the Abandoned Fortress. So the Abandoned Fortress is really cool because it has really two, in my mind, two different levels. There's the top part of the fortress, which is to basically was built to resist attacks and to protect a certain area to give it a military advantage. But then there's an underground part. And when I use the word dungeon, I'm assuming there's an underground part of it. So you have this fortress and you have the top part. And I like it because players can explore the top part, but finding the bottom level isn't necessarily evident. They may need to do a lot of searching, a lot of investigating to even find a way to access the lower portion, like the underground part of the fortress. That's where the sensitive stuff would be. That's where the plans would be, the old scrolls. That's where the treasure would be, right? Also maybe where the zombie undead corpses of the soldiers who once manned the fortress, or their ghosts or the poltergeists, that's where they would be roaming, right? So this is very much like a buried ruin type situation, except for you have the top level and you have the bottom level. And I think that the top level and the bottom level are sort of like two different chapters of this dungeon, because you have to navigate the top level in order to gain access to the bottom level. And then that's a whole different adventure in itself. And it's super cool because a fortress was really designed to resist attacks from the outside. So what you're looking at is a situation where they kind of need to gain access to the fortress and then find the underground that way, because it's highly unlikely that they're going to be outside entryways into that dungeon unless they find some kind of secret tunnel, which could provide an awesome escape. But these are usually really hard to find to enter unless you have some kind of like map detailing where those locations are, which is kind of a cool thing. And that's going to lead us to dungeon type number 8, elemental planes or themed dungeons. Okay. Now, when I talk about elemental planes or elementally themed dungeons, I'm talking about basically dungeons that are based around one theme. So you have like fire, water, air, or earth, or maybe other specific types of things. But the idea here is that you think, okay, what would a fire dungeon look like? What would a water dungeon look like? Or maybe even a different form of these. Like what would a water but frozen, so an ice dungeon look like? Okay. Now, basically what this is it's a dungeon, okay? But for some reason, there's a lot of a specific type of element here. For example, maybe you have a dungeon that was there at one time, built of like indestructible stone, but then a volcano erupted and filled the dungeon with lava. Now you have this dungeon that's basically just like lava flowing down all the walls. It's like a fire dungeon. Or maybe there was a dungeon that was built before the climate change, and then you have a climate change and an ice age, and now you have an ice dungeon. Okay, so it's just like a themed dungeon, but it's themed around an element. I think this is so cool because it offers really cool opportunities for unique dangers, but it also represents a kind of a cool historical exploration thing. So like when players go into these, it's like, well, how did this become a fire dungeon, or how did this become a dungeon that was frozen, or why is the whole dungeon underwater? That could be nothing. It could be a water-based dungeon. So anyway, this is just a cool example, and players can find this really fun because a lot of unique kind of like spell casting elemental type spell abilities could interact with this dungeon in ways that maybe players don't often get to practice or do in games, because this type of dungeon is kind of rare in my experience. I've in all my years of playing and running dungeons, I've only seen maybe a handful of dungeons who kind of fit this specific category. So super cool, super interesting, different thing to do. That's going to lead us to dungeon type number 9, Demi Planes and Pocket Dimension dungeons. Now, I've actually run quite a few of these, and these are really cool for a lot of different reasons. Now, what is a demiplane or pocket dimension dungeon? So it's a small self-contained world or space, usually created by mages, powerful mages, or by deities, but it's basically a space that exists in its own location, sort of a pocket dimension outside of the the material plane or outside of any other plane or between planes. It's in its own dimensional space. And so when you enter the dungeon, you're really leaving your plane of existence and going into sort of an unknown no man's land plane where really anything's possible and anything could happen. And for this reason, these types of dungeons often defy just basic laws of physics. They often defy planar rules. They're often filled with very powerful and rare things, also very dangerous traps, dangerous bad guys. And there is the ever present danger of getting trapped in such a dungeon because it's sort of like venturing into a bag of holding or any other sort of pocket dimension thing. It's like, okay, if you're going to leave your plane and you're going to go into this dungeon, are you sure you can get back? Are you sure that you know how to get back? Are you sure that you're not going to get trapped there? And if you're going to get trapped there, what are the consequences going to be? How does time flow there? This also opens the opportunity for going into dungeons that are on different planes or in different dimensions. Time runs differently. Maybe you go in there and time stops while you're in there. Maybe time doesn't pass normally in there. Maybe you go in there and time speeds way up. You come out, you think it's been 2 hours, it's been 20 years, right? So this type of thing is really fun. And I have dabbled in these types of dungeons and worlds and just kind of different things in my games. And it's so much fun. You have to be a little bit careful and you want to make sure the players have the opportunity to kind of make a somewhat educated guess going in, at least leave some clues to the danger, but super fun. Really, really cool, kind of abstract adventuresome type thing, especially awesome for higher level parties. That's going to lead us to type of dungeon number 10, sewers and underground networks. Now, sewers and underground networks like maintenance tunnels and the like are really fun because they're not really designed to be a dungeon. They're actually designed for a functional purpose. So, for example, a sewerway in a city is really designed to collect waste and wastewater and funnel it toward the exit point, which might be out to the ocean or it might be to some big swamp or whatever. However, the fact that these tunnels exist and the complexity of them, especially in like larger cities and in larger networks, means that there are often creatures or forces or factions who make their home in them. Why would they do this? Because they're maybe an anti-law faction. Maybe it's a creature that would not be accepted up on the top level. Maybe you have like a rat colony of semi-sentient rats and they have to make their home down here and they have a whole little colony in the corner, kind of in an offshoot of one of these spillage ways. Maybe they have built a dam to reroute some of the water or they've carved their own maintenance tunnel holes. And so they've been able to redirect the water and they can use entire rooms in the system for their own purposes. You might have criminals hiding from the law living down here, but you could also have like underground mages, wizards, sorcerers doing research down here, research that is against the law everywhere else, but down here they can practice it in hiding. And then there's the opportunity also for treasure, for adventure, for really interesting conflicts here. So anyway, that's another type of dungeon that's super fun to run. That's going to lead us to dungeon type number 11, sacred temples and shrines. So a sacred temple or a shrine is basically this. You might have a church or a holy religious site or a monastery, but then we have that word dungeon. So what makes this a dungeon? Well, there's probably an underground portion of it that is sectioned off. People are not usually allowed down here. Why? Probably because it's very sacred or very holy. Or maybe there's a holy church on top, but it's built upon the basement where there's an unholy relic and they're hiding it or protecting it. And so you have these underground, like basically networks, complexes, layers, even dungeons or vaults where maybe unholy things are hidden or the whole church's treasure is hidden under there, right? Maybe they have a monster down there guarding it. You never know. But it's also possible that when you go down here, it's a very divine and religious experience. You might have contact with the gods or goddesses involved when you go down here. There might be various different shrines along the way. There might be even a whole hidden order of monks or worshipers or even a cult down here that the church doesn't even know about. So this is a really fun type of dungeon, sort of more religiously focused and really fun to run, especially if you're running some clerics or paladins in your group. That's going to lead us to the type of dungeon number 12, prison complexes. Prison complexes And when I refer to dungeon, the dungeon part of a prison complex is basically this. Maybe you have a prison and it is maybe in a city. The city puts their criminals there, right? It's like a castle and it's got a bunch of rooms and there's bars over the doors and people cannot escape, right? The criminals are here. But then maybe you have an underground portion of this. Maybe the worst criminals go down here. Or maybe when the criminals are put to death or they die, they're transported to the underground complex where they are reanimated and turned into undead. Maybe they have a whole bunch of undead running around down here. Maybe this is sanctioned by the government and it's like a fail safe in case someone conquers them, they'll pull the lever and let them all out. Or maybe this is going on under the books. Like maybe nobody knows about this. Maybe the local necromancer has bribed the deepest section of guards in the prison and they work with him to make this happen. Or maybe you just have a deeper part of the dungeon where the worst of the worst criminals go, or the most dangerous monsters, or the most dangerous mages, the people who really can't afford to have them escape. Maybe they go down here. Now, why would the player characters want to go down here? Maybe they have a contact down here. Maybe they need to rescue a wizard who they know can help them achieve their goals. It's a dangerous gamble, but they have high stakes. Maybe there is the castle treasury down here. Maybe when they bring all of the prisoners in, they take their belongings, they take the stuff they had, their loot, maybe even their treasure, and they put it all in a big vault in the bottom of this. Every year, the king or the governor goes through it, sifts through it, and gets out what they want. But your characters know that a few months ago, someone was arrested who had the artifact you need. You know the king has not taken it yet because that cycle hasn't started up again. So they're going to have to go down there, break into the evidence locker deep in the prison dungeon and get the artifact. So this is just a really fun type of dungeon. It could also be fun because maybe they need to get themselves arrested and transported down there just to gain access to it. And then the plan is to get out somehow. Could be really fun kind of adventure. That's going to lead us to number 13, Lost Civilizations. Now, we've talked about buried ruins and we have talked about underground cities as possible dungeon options. What makes Lost Civilizations different? Well, a Lost Civilization, in my mind, is defined this way. It is if we're calling it a dungeon, it's underground. But if it's a civilization, maybe there is still a civilization, a culture there. So this is not a civilization that has been rendered dead or obsolete or passed on. It is a lost civilization. This is literally maybe a city that collapsed into the ocean and somehow was preserved, or maybe sunk in an earthquake. Now the inhabitants truly are lost underground. There's a whole civilization underground. They do not have access to the top layer. Maybe they have been mining for hundreds of years trying to get out, but they have not managed it yet. Maybe a great magical cataclysm sunk this whole city, and now there's this whole civilization underground that is thriving and living, but it is separate from the top section, from the surface. And if your player characters get down here, they will find a very exotic, strange place where maybe people are speaking a different language, where they have all these different types of crafts, dances, cultures, religious practices, and different types of humanoids. Maybe they've evolved after centuries underground, but they also doubtlessly have treasure and magical artifacts and the riches of their lost civilization kingdom. And so this could make for a really fun adventure, especially if you take evolution into account. You think about what are the different animals, different like features the animals might have. Like, you know, how would dragons evolve being underground for hundreds, thousands, millions of years? And then determining the age of your lost civilization can help you to determine how far advanced that evolution may have gotten. And that's going to lead us to option number 14 in our dungeon option list, mines and resource tunnels. All right, now when it comes to mines and resource tunnels, like what are these things? Okay, mines, obviously, people, humanoids are going to dig tunnels underground to mine precious minerals, maybe gold, silver, bronze, iron, salt, right? They're going to dig underground and get the rich stuff, the stuff that's going to make them rich, their vital resources. So these mine shafts are going to go deep and they're going to go in different directions because they're trying to find the veins of gold or the deposits of iron ore or whatever it is they're looking for, or maybe the diamonds or the gems or the jewels. Okay, so we have these mines going all over the place. And then we also have resource tunnels built to supply these mines. Okay, so maybe you have a mine that's gone way down, it's gone way over, but then you have resource tunnels that tunnel directly down to save time, to get resources to the miners. This is a whole ongoing operation. And the complexity of the tunnel is going to be very directly related to how long this operation has been going. And the size of the tunnels is also going to be dictated by what types of humanoids were doing the mining. Now, with that being said, this can be a really fun type of dungeon to run because you could do an abandoned mine thing where you have mines that have been abandoned for years and years and years. This would make obvious great hiding place for criminal factions, for bad guys, for species that are not accepted on top. Like maybe you've got like maybe goblins, hobgoblins. You've got creatures that are just not accepted, generally speaking, among the rest of the humanoid races. They might make their homes here, but monsters may also make their homes here. This is a great place for trolls to raise a family, or ogres, or you might find banshees down here in a place like this. All kinds of different opportunities for different monsters. Building lairs exist in the mine thing, but let's not forget one of the funnest parts of a mine dungeon and exploring it is the cart system. A lot of mines had a cart system with rails. So your characters, maybe they find the cart and they load up their stuff and they go and they ride through the tunnels, and they have to get out and change the shift levers to change lanes or to go down different tunnels, or maybe they have the levers and they have to hit them as they fly by. And this can be fun because it can create sort of like almost a train, like a hand operated train adventure underground. And so to me, that is one of the funnest things about like a mine dungeon, and then the resource tunnels are connected to it. But anyway, super fun type of dungeon to run. And this leads us to dungeon type number 15, which is Fay Wild Glades and Enchanted Forests. So Fey Wild stuff is always wild and just in general. And I love running Fey creatures. There's like a naturalness, a chaoticness, but also kind of a wholesomeness to the whole Fey thing that I think is super fun. Now, when I say dungeon, once again, I'm talking about underground. So how can you have a Fey Wild Glade or Enchanted Forest underground? Well, it's very simple. You make it underground. I ran one not too long ago that was sort of like an underground cavern with a bunch of mushrooms growing like trees. And the Fey people lived amongst the mushroom trees. And so it was like a little Feywild glen or enchanted forest, but it was underground. And that was just how it was run. And so one thing that's fun about these types of dungeons is that they're often very natural, very beautiful, but things are not always what they seem, because the Fey like to cast illusions. They like to play games. So you often have an adventure where the player characters are going to run into the Fey. They're going to be asked to make deals. And so you have almost these mind games as they navigate this beautiful underground enchanted forest or Feywild Glade. Maybe there's a Fey who's on the side. Maybe there's 5 that want to take advantage of them. So it's like a fun thing. But anyway, that's another type of dungeon you can run. This leads me to option number 16 in our dungeon list: shipwrecks and underwater ruins. So I've already talked a little bit about an underwater dungeon in like an elemental water sense. But let's talk for a minute about shipwrecks and underwater ruins. So you might have a shipwreck, big old ship, big like cargo ship with many, many rooms, maybe made of steel. And the players could go down in there, and that could function as a sort of dungeon, but it's dangerous because maybe they need stuff to help them breathe underwater or spells to help them do it. Maybe they're limited on time. There's sharks, octopuses, giant squids. Okay. Don't forget about the Kraken. Okay. But there could also be underwater ruins that literally they have to navigate underwater. Maybe there's a city like the lost city of Atlantis at the bottom of the ocean. It has been long since flooded. Now maybe there's an aquatic race of people who live there, or maybe it is just inhabited by animals at the bottom of the sea, but the player characters have to explore it to find the treasure or to find the map or to find the magic item or the whatever it is, but they have to go underwater to do it. This is a super fun type of dungeon. Really makes for a different type of play experience. Like you say, your characters, hey, you're gonna have to go underwater for this, and then you kind of let them prepare how they see fit. They have to go shopping for gear or spells or potions that'll help them to do this, and that can be a really, really fun like thing to do. This is going to lead us to number 17: infernal or abyssal realm dungeons. So, infernal or abyssal realm dungeons are exactly what they sound like. They are dungeons that are located either in the abyss or in the infernal plane. And these are obviously awesome for a lot of different reasons. When you go to the infernal plane, the nine hells, you have devils, you have devil dungeons. And I imagine these devilish type dungeons being made of things like, rock that is continually aflame and lava. And there are bars of just molten metal, and there are torture chambers, and the devils are locking dangerous creatures up in these dungeons. And if you go down into these dungeons, especially in the deeper levels, who knows what horrors you will uncover, because the devils have all kinds of things hidden. They are hiding treasure, they're hiding old monsters, they're hiding corpses in their crypts, old corpses that they can't afford to have resurrected, like all kinds of wild things, weapons, armor. So I just think, like, okay, if you're going to go to the infernal plane and you're going to go dungeoneering, be ready for wild madness. And then the same is true of the abyss. I'm picturing like City of Bones type stuff, like dungeons made of bones with demonic creatures stalking the halls, ancient artifacts, dark, mysterious, malevolent artifacts being hidden, in the deepest layers of these dungeons. The demons constantly at war over who's going to get the spoils and control them. Maybe demon lords presiding over the dungeons, or maybe even inhabiting different rooms of the dungeons. And so this just opens up a whole different new type of thing. You want to dungeoneer in the abyss, you best bring your A game, is what I would say to my players, because it is a dangerous business, but the rewards can be great. And this is going to lead us to number 18 in our list: time displaced dungeons. Now, I've already talked about this a little bit when we were talking about like planar dungeons or pocket dimension dungeons, but time displaced dungeons are dungeons where specifically time behaves differently, causing aging, time loops, or maybe historical echoes. Okay. Time anomalies in these types of dungeons can create unique narrative experiences, but require careful management to avoid confusion. So, to run this type of dungeon, you have to figure out, okay, why is it doing this? Maybe it's in a pocket dimension. Maybe there's a magic field here. Maybe there's a magic aura. Maybe there's a curse here. Okay. You also need to figure out the mechanism. Exactly how does time differ here? Is it different in different rooms? Is the whole dungeon a uniform difference? Like, as they go deeper, does time move slower or faster? Or is it possible for time to be reversed here? Is it only going to affect the players, or is it going to affect everything else? So there are a lot of like really big things you need to think of when you're running a time displaced dungeon. But the fun part of this is that you can set timers and make every minute count. And if you carefully track that time, and the players will be like, why are you tracking this time? I don't know. I guess you'll see when you get out. Like, this can be really fun, kind of foreboding type thing. Especially if you give them clues along the way to make them realize it. Then you have like an interstellar type situation where they go onto the planet. If they're not careful, they'll spend 10 years down there, but it feels like 3 hours to them, right? So it's like one of those types of things. It's super, super fun. This is going to lead us to option number 19 for dungeons: the Mad Mage's Lair. Okay. Now, we've already talked about sort of like wizard laboratories, but let's talk about the lair of a mad wizard. Okay. We have a mad wizard, chaotic, crazy, insane. Think brilliant wizard, extremely powerful magic, absolutely crazy and insane. What kind of lair would this produce? What kind of lair? Like this type of wizard could magically create his lair. He doesn't even need to go get a shovel to excavate it. He can magically create this for himself. What is he going to do? Well, this is maybe the scariest thing. He needs a place to hide. He needs a place to store his stuff. He needs a place to store his treasure. What drove him mad? Is that hidden in the dungeon? Is there like a powerful artifact that drives you to insanity, right? Or does he have monsters down here? Does he keep them as pets? Does he keep them as defense mechanisms? Is he still alive, or is he gone? If he's gone, is he truly fully gone, or does he still stalk his lair? This is just such a fun, crazy, chaotic thing. You can have these dungeons break conventional rules. They don't even need to make sense because they were created by literally a mad wizard or mage. So it's super fun, and you can be super creative with these types of dungeons. This is going to lead us to type number 20, final dungeon on our list: planar gateway dungeons. So, planar gateway dungeons are exactly what they sound like. They're dungeons that house portals to other planes of existence. These may be guarded or controlled by various different entities. They may be protected by traps. There may be puzzles, or there may be interesting mechanical mechanisms that operate the gates. Things may be coming in and out of the gates. But the whole point of this dungeon is it's underground. It's probably been forgotten about. So it's not like there's not like a big sign that says, "Oh, come visit our Planar Gateway dungeon." It's more like I heard rumor of this researching these old forbidden documents. Is there truly a Planar Gateway dungeon out in the so and so, underneath the so and so, miles and miles away from everything else? And then we go around there, and you know what there is? It's occupied by a secret cult of defenders who have all removed their tongues so they cannot speak the secrets or the passwords, and they fight like monks. And it is a dangerous, dangerous place. They have monsters. They ride monsters around underground to eat you so that you will not go through the gates. Why are they doing this? Because this Planar Gateway dungeon is very dangerous, because anything could come in and out if these gates are not locked up. There are special mechanisms. You'll need to get the monks to show you how to use it if you can even manage that, or you're going to have to read their thoughts or something. Anyway, so this is just a really fun idea for a dungeon where you can go to and fro your plane into other planes, and that have planar travel is just a fun thing. Just be advised, this can break a campaign if you're not careful, or it could lead to a TPK relatively fast if the players accidentally use the controls wrong and they go to the wrong type of plane. As you know, some planes are just no good for anybody. You go there and you will immediately be eviscerated. But anyway, so there you go. That's going to conclude my list of 20 different dungeons you can run in your games. I hope that you have had fun. I hope this has given you some cool inspiration. And hey, drop a comment. Let me know what dungeon you're planning to run next. I would love to hear about it. Thank you so much for watching another one of my videos. I'm here every single day creating videos about the best game in the world, D&D. So I will see you awesome people on the next one.